Welcome to the Ketodontist Podcast with your host, Dr. Matt. We're here to explore the worlds of low-carb and ketogenic diets, primal and paleo lifestyles, and oral and whole-body health. We're taking the best information from the leading minds in health and wellness and making those worlds collide. This is the Ketodontist Podcast.
Hello everybody. Welcome back to the Ketodontist Podcast. My name is Dr. Matthew Standridge. I'm a practicing dentist and health coach in the United States here in Yates Center, Kansas. I am also a certified primal health coach and a certified fitness trainer and sports nutritionist through the ISSA. I'm a Keto Gains Bootcamp coach, and as of recently, I am a Menno Henselman certified trainer. Since the beginning of 2016, I've lost over 90 pounds by adopting a primal ketogenic lifestyle to help correct my metabolism, heal inflammatory issues, and improve mental clarity and cognition. While this show is not meant to be seen as giving specific medical advice, after seeing the improvements in my and my family's quality of life through diet and lifestyle change, I was inspired to spread the message of healthy, real nutrition to my patients, my community, and now you. This show will also track my journey to even further weight loss and increased health, as well as help guide others along their own path to better health and wellness. So if you're new to the show, I welcome you. I'm glad you found your way here. This show is to help clear a lot of the confusion and misinformation around this low-carb health sphere, especially around keto, paleo, and primal lifestyles. And for those of you who are regular listeners to the show, I am so glad that you're back. It is the loyal listeners of this show that are the backbone of what we're trying to accomplish here. And that's really to spread the message of healthy living and reverse the epidemic of chronic diseases, especially when it comes down to these diabetes-related diseases. And it's because of you good people that this show continues to grow, but we cannot let up. We cannot let our foot off the gas. There's so much misinformation being spread that it's up to us. It's our duty to get the right information out there, but also to lead by example. So if you haven't yet, I call on you, please share the show, leave a 5-star rating or a written review. It's through these steps that we get out, we reach more people and make an impact on the world, but I can't do it without your help. So before we get started on today's show, just a reminder that if you're looking for coaching, whether it be in keto, paleo, primal lifestyle, weight loss, or any combination of the above, feel free to shoot me an email at ketodontist@gmail.com. So that's ketodontist, DONTIST, @gmail.com. From there, I will send you some discovery forms to see what you're wanting to get out of coaching, and then we can see if it's going to be a mutually beneficial relationship. Also, I urge you to join the private Facebook page dedicated to listeners of this show. That page or group is called Dr. Standridge's Keto Primal Connection. It was formerly known as Dr. Standridge's Ketodontist Podcast. I'm playing around with the idea of rebranding the show come the new year, but don't worry, I'll always be known as the Ketodontist. So today's show is going to be about grains, but before we get on to that, one more special announcement. I'm very excited to announce that we've partnered with ButcherBox. For those of you who don't know what ButcherBox is, it's a company that launched in 2015, and they deliver boxes of frozen, grass-fed beef, free-range organic chicken, and heritage-bred pork to subscribers or members around the United States. And ButcherBox sells only meats raised without antibiotics or added hormones, ships them in curbside and recyclable boxes. They're already made out of recycled materials, and they really pride themselves on partnering with vendors that use sustainable, humane approaches and fair labor practices. They are truly doing things the right way, folks. I've passed up numerous potential sponsors trying to sell their keto-fied products here, but I've dedicated myself to only bring on a sponsor if and when it was a product or service that I could back wholeheartedly and I would use or do use myself. So for listeners and readers of my blog or podcast, click on the banner over at the website, ketodontist.com, and you can get some special goodies. You can get 2 pounds of ground beef and 2 packs of bacon for free. It doesn't get much better than this, folks. So go over to Ketodontist.com, click on the Butcher Box post and banner, and go get your freebies. Also, if you just listen to the podcast and you want another way to save, use code AP10, that's AP10 at checkout to save $10 off your first order and get a free pack of bacon. Now this promo is only good to December 25th, so take care of it while you can and have a Merry Christmas, you filthy animals. Alright, so getting back onto the show here, we are talking about grains and why they are overrated. You cannot go throughout society without hearing of heart-healthy whole grains, right? Well, that's a crop. Grains are completely overrated. They're pretty lame as far as nutrition goes, and that is what I want to dismantle on this show today. So, real quick, grains, they're a cheap source of calories. And they're readily converted to glucose. That's about all there is to it. They have minimal nutritional value. They spike insulin. They contain anti-nutrients that can compromise our immune function, compromise our digestive health, can promote inflammation, and they can block the absorption of vitamins and minerals. And we're going to go through all of this today. And so, grains, they've formed the foundation of the human diet since the advent of civilization. So basically around the time of agriculture, starting about 10,000 years ago. And that's because they're easy to harvest and they're easy to store compared to our hunter and gatherer ways. Now today, they're processed in basically high profit packaging and baked and frozen goods. And then also, we talk about refined, quote-unquote, white grains and sugars, and yeah, everybody kind of agrees that those are not healthy. But even the vaunted heart-healthy whole grains can promote excess insulin production. They have minimal nutritional value compared to whole fruits and vegetables, non-starchy vegetables, and that type of stuff. So, whole grains also have higher levels of anti-nutrients than refined grains do, and that can make them even more problematic to those who are sensitive to these things. And then I also want to talk about legumes because they have higher nutritional value and fewer anti-nutrients compared to grains, but really legumes are unnecessary to consume anyway compared to, like I said, non-starchy, dark leafy green vegetables, stuff like that, certain fruits and everything, because legumes are unnecessary as well because of their high carbohydrate load, and they can still pose some problems digestively as well. So when we talk about grains, we're talking about wheat, obviously, we're talking about rice, we're talking about corn, we're talking about the breads, the pastas, the cookies. We're talking about cooking grains even, so barley, millet, oats, rye, etc. And so all of this stuff in the packaging of breads, pastas, snack foods, cakes, cookies, crackers, candies, all of these packaged goods, both frozen and fresh baked goods. It's important to remember that all forms of carbohydrates ultimately become glucose in the bloodstream. So while, whole grains and other complex carbs burn slower than sugars, ultimately the destination is the same, and that is blood sugar. And so if we have problems with regulating blood sugar, so for folks who are diabetic or are pre-diabetic, stuff like that, or have insulin resistance and whatnot, they're just not really that great for your diet. And just as a quick sugar spike can be very inflammatory and compromise immune function, really that steady insulin trip that just, instead of a radical hike, it's more mainstream and it's more consistent, but chronic elevation can still cause some health problems. Now, when we're talking about going back to legumes for a second, they have more nutritional value and they have lower anti-nutrients. However, they're still unnecessary because they still have that excessive insulin production. And they can be hard to digest for folks who are sensitive. So when we're talking about legumes, we're talking about lentils, peanuts, beans, soy and soy products, and also peas. And then we're going to get into some of the anti-nutrients. We're going to talk about lectins. We're going to talk about glutens, phytates. We'll talk about how wheat has been modified genetically over time and what potential consequences of that are. So first off, getting into anti-nutrients. So first and foremost, an anti-nutrient is really any agent that are found in grains that compromises nutritional health. And so the four main anti-nutrients that we talk about are lectins, gluten, phytates, also known as phytic acids, and saponins. So let's talk about, also, before I forget, there's a potential fifth anti-nutrient that's actually fiber. So depending on the context of the situation, fiber can actually kind of toe the line between being a nutrient and an anti-nutrient. So everybody talks about fiber being healthy, but we'll discuss that, how that might not be the case. So first off, let's talk about lectins, right? Lectins are a phytochemical toxin that plants produce as a defense mechanism. So that can be to defend against insects. It can be used to defend against microorganisms. It can also be used to defend against UV damage as well. Now these agents, these lectins, are critical to a plant's survival, right? And so they're often found in the highest concentration when they're little seeds. Now, since any animal that's consumed plants, they're subject to the toxic effects, but usually they've had a long period of adaptation. So take birds, for example. Birds have been consuming seeds since the beginning, so they're well adapted to consuming lectins. However, humans, we've only been consuming lectins for the last 10,000 years, which really, on the grand scheme of things, is a tiny fraction of our evolutionary timeline. So, toxic lectins found in plant foods can have a toxic effect when ingested, and it can interfere with protective gut barriers and really can promote systemic inflammation. Other forms of lectins promote basic health and metabolic activities. So when we talk about our innate immune system, right, it relies on what's called complement proteins to help control inflammation and remove pathogens from the body. Without getting too geeky about this, one of the biochemical pathways these complement proteins operate on is the lectin pathway. So mannan binding lectins, or MBLs for short, are involved in the process are produced in the liver and can bind to bacteria. They can bind to viruses such as Salmonella, Listeria, Candida. They can bind to fungus. And once bound, they initiate the so-called complement cascade to promote clearance of infection agents. Now, certain plant lectins can produce what's called a hormetic effect. So a hormetic effect is a favorable adaptive response to a stressor, right? So take like building muscles, weightlifting, for example, and the muscle cell grows. That is a hormetic effect. So certain plant lectins can have a hormetic effect when ingestion, delivering anti-tumor and anti-cancer effects. But lectins have also been observed to inhibit protein synthesis in cancer cells, but not normal cells. So depending on the context of the situations, not all lectins are created equal. But the two classes of lectins that are can be very problematic are prolamins, which are they're high in the amino acid proline, and agglutinins, which what they can do is agglutinate, or basically what that means is clumping together red blood cells. So there is, according to Sarah Ballantyne, PhD, author of the Paleo Approach, she suggests that the correct terminology is quote-unquote toxic lectins when referring to the health concerns of ingesting these particular form of lectins, right? So when toxin lectins are ingested, they can damage the microvilli, or the brush borders of the small intestine. And that allows undigested and foreign proteins to infiltrate into the bloodstream. And these undigested proteins, through that leaky gut, you hear about leaky gut, right? When released through that leaky gut lining, can literally be categorized as fecal matter. So it's basically letting crap into your bloodstream. These lectins are similar, but not quite identical, but similar to proteins found in cells and organs through the body. So as they go through the bloodstream, they can trick the immune system. Well, not just the immune system, the endocrine, the digestive system, to integrating them into routine cellular function known as molecular mimicry. The infiltration of these agents into the bloodstream is a situation characterized as leaky gut syndrome. You've probably heard of that before. So in healthy digestive function, only approved and familiar agents, so like carbs, amino acids, fatty acids, are released into the bloodstream, while toxins, bacteria, and undigested proteins are limited to the intestines until they're released for waste. But in this leaky gut situations, these incomplete proteins and all that stuff are released into the bloodstream, and those can cause some serious issues. So you can see how releasing this quote-unquote fecal matter into the bloodstream could really cause some issues. And there are tons of autoimmune reactions that can occur outside of these when this happens. So the lectin proteins can infiltrate healthy nerve, liver, or thyroid cells. This has been attributed as a possible contributor to fibromyalgia, to Hashimoto's. The jury's still out on that, but there's a lot of hypothesis saying that is a contributing factor to these things. And chronic exposure over time could has been hypothesized to be associated with liver problems as well. And so when this happens, people can have mild inflammatory reactions to these lectins. They could have severe gastric distress and inflammatory flare-ups, So, we commonly, when these things happen, so one popular drug is Nexium, right, to treat heartburn or GERD. It's a proton pump inhibitor. And it's actually the second best-selling drug. So the little purple pill generates well over $6 billion in sales. But these medications generally just mask the symptoms of the pain from this lectin exposure, and really fail to address the true cause of it. So really, throughout the 2.5 million years of evolution, our genes really are only suitable for the ingestion of fatty acids, amino acids, glucose, vitamins and minerals, and fiber to an extent. We haven't really evolved to effectively digest these lectins, especially found in these modern grains and these modern wheats. So Humans can obviously tolerate anti-nutrients, but there's quite a bit of a difference between tolerating a food and eating a food for optimal health. So, going back to leaky gut for a situation, for a minute, there's a book called The Hidden Plague by Tara Grant. And Tara she gives a list of symptoms often associated with leaky gut, and that includes achy joints and muscles, autoimmune conditions, fatigue, allergies, depression and cognitive issues, asthma, inflammatory conditions. So these are all under the umbrella of possible symptoms of leaky gut. So if you have an issue with those, especially around postprandial, around consuming grains, would not be a bad idea to cut grains out of the diet. And we'll talk a little bit more about that here in a minute. So we talked about lectins. Next, I want to talk about gluten. And so gluten is a prolammin form of lectin that can trigger an inflammatory reaction in the body. Now, we all know what celiac disease is, and that is true gluten allergy. It's the most severe form of gluten intolerance. But there are researchers that believe that up to a third of the population have some sort of gluten intolerance. We've hinted on FODMAPs before, and I'm going to save that to another episode. But just because somebody doesn't have an allergy to something doesn't mean that it's a totally benign substance for a lot of people to be eating. So going to gluten. Gluten is a large water-soluble protein, and that's actually what, when you knead dough and it becomes elastic, it's because of gluten that you can get that elasticity in dough. And it's found mostly in wheat, but it can be also in other grains like rye and barley. And all grains contain an objectable amount of lectin, okay? So gluten is one of the most common allergenic foods, and it's particularly those sensitive with inflammatory response ingesting gluten. So going back to that leaky gut syndrome, a lot of these inflammatory responses can be multifactorial, and that can be like I said, inflammatory issues. I'll tell you, with me, if I've been exposed to gluten too much back when I was, I'd have cheat days and whatnot, I would barely be able to breathe through my nose. I'd have so much sinusitis. I'd have so much congestion. My knees would hurt. And so, and it'd be after eating a pizza or whatever. But if I had a grain-free, like a fathead pizza, a keto-fied pizza, or a chicken breast dough pizza, I wouldn't have those issues. But if I had like a regular pizza on a quote-unquote cheat day, which I no longer do, but back in the day, I'd barely be able to breathe through my nose the next day, and all my joints would hurt. So, and there, other people have reported similar itis, similar inflammation issues, dermatitis, acid reflux, and flare-up of autoimmune disorders. People who, quote-unquote, suffer from fibromyalgia. A lot of these folks find flare-ups worse after they've contained gluten-containing meals. So, and then, children who have celiac disease, they're often found to be obese, have chronic digestive issues, diarrhea, headaches, difficulties to learn, difficulties with sleeping. And so there's some disagreement on gluten sensitivity versus a true immunologic response, right? So with that, I have a couple of quotes by Dr. Kate Shanahan. To quote her, most people who avoid gluten and experience benefits have cut out processed foods that typically are high in gluten while also reducing their fast foods, so the health improvements could be attributed to the reduction in carbs and removal of unnatural molecules involved in food processing more than the specific removal of gluten. Wheat is an ancient food, and while the modern wheat contains more carbs and gluten than the ancient grains did, it could be that the carbs are a bigger problem than the gluten. She also says that processing any protein renders it harmful, and gluten is no exception. But this processed gluten will be entirely different than unprocessed gluten. And lastly, when talking about celiac and other autoimmune disorders, she says, quote, "The immune system makes mistakes when it's stressed. Remove the stress and the immune system can recognize its mistake. Avoiding the foods that stress the immune system is likely to prevent and reverse many autoimmune conditions. For example, children with egg and other allergies can often outgrow these allergies by eliminating these foods for a period of time." Okay, so we've talked about gluten. Next, I want to talk about phytates or phytic acid. And this is an indigestible antioxidant found in whole grains. And they're found in nuts and seeds and stuff like that. So, phytates, the reason I am not a huge fan of grains, even more so than the glutens and the lectins, are really the phytates and the phytic acid. From a dentalist perspective, I don't like them because I think they help create a more acidic environment in the mouth, which obviously is going to predispose us to more dental disease and cavities. But also, the big reason I don't like phytic acid is because it can bind to important minerals like calcium and magnesium and copper, iron, zinc, and it can bind to these in the digestive tract, making these nutrients difficult to absorb. But I do also think that if it binds to in the digestive tract, it can also bind to them in the mouth, so it can help. It binds to these calcium ions, which with teeth remineralization and demineralization, we have a loss and uptake of these minerals, and if we're consuming phytic acid, that it could potentially be blocking the reabsorption the remineralization of our teeth, which is a very important thing for protection against dental disease. And it's also believed that excessive phytate ingestion can compromise vitamin D levels by blocking the circulation of vitamin D in the metabolites of vitamin D in the liver and the intestines, and also can inhibit calcium uptake, which suppresses vitamin D production in the liver. Now, one thing and I actually learned this going through my Menno Henselman's training, that there's a study by Bowen et al. In the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition back in 2004 showing that the presence of phytic acid can block magnesium absorption by up to 40%. That's pretty big. And so if you ever wonder why like Iron Kids bread and stuff is fortified with all these vitamins and minerals, it's to try to overcome the blocking that's going to happen with the ingestion of the bread. And so while in Western countries there's abundant access to food, so nutrient deficiencies are rare, but really a high grain diet, especially when they're high in like these phytic acids, can pose potential problems and nutrient deficiency, and we can see these in like vegetarians and vegans that are consuming high grains compared to like people who follow more of a paleo approach. And so when you have this high phytate consumption compared to the stresses of modern living, we can have an overproduction of stress hormones like cortisol, which has a catabolic effect on the body, and that can also include the blocking of calcium uptake into our bones, into the skeleton. So and then since dietary phytates can inhibit calcium absorption, when you combine grain-based diets with high-stress lifestyles, they can be it can have potential of increased risk for osteoporosis. So, and like I said, it's not just phytic acid isn't just found in grains; they can be found in legumes as well. And so, it's been proposed that a safe level of phytic acid is between 100 to 400 milligrams per day. Now, depending on the content of some even quote-unquote paleo foods, you could far surpass that. So like 100-gram serving of Brazil nuts has 1,700 milligrams of phytic acid. So well above that threshold. Almonds, 100-gram serving of almonds can contain anywhere between 1,600 to 1,800 milligrams. Walnuts, coconut even, 100 milligrams of coconut can automatically reach you to the upper level of that 100 to 400, because about a 100-gram serving will give you about 400 milligrams of phytic acid. So even some quote-unquote paleo primal foods you have to be careful with. Now, it's important to note that a lot of the flours, so your almond flours, your coconut flours, and all that stuff, they're going to have less phytic acid because the skins of the nuts have been removed, and that's where the phytic acid's found. So, so phytic acid is like probably the biggest reason I'm not a huge fan of grains and really legumes for that matter. So. I mentioned saponins before. So saponins are named because they foam up like soap when shaken in water. And saponins, it's another defense mechanism for plants, and mainly defends against microbes and fungi. And so they have a detergent-like chemical structure, the reason why they foam up like soap. And they bind on one end with water molecules, and on the other end they bind to fat or cholesterol. So that gives them kind of an interesting structure. So saponins, the problem with them is they can permeate the gut cell membranes, but they can also permeate membranes of other cells. And so if they are entered the bloodstream via leaky gut, they can compromise the ability of red blood cells to even process oxygen in a process called hemolysis. So, and it's also important to know that cooking does not destroy saponins. So beans and legumes will still deliver saponins even when they're cooked. So, Rob Wolf back in the Paleo Solution, I have a quote by him here. Saponins are so irritating to the immune system that they are used in vaccine research to help the body mount a powerful immune response. Those suffering acutely from the effects of leaky gut and requiring a strict exclusionary diet often eliminate saponin-containing foods such as all legumes, alfalfa, beans, peas, lentils, soy products, buckwheat and quinoa, chia and flax seeds, and even root beer. So saponins, while they kind of take a back seat compared to the other, they're not really without fault or blame as well. And so because of all of this stuff, so grains contain all of this stuff that our bodies, a lot of people haven't really evolved to handle, right? And so because it's so new on our evolutionary timeline, we just don't have the metabolic machinery to really handle this stuff, especially chronically. And when you think about the food pyramid, the United States food pyramid, based on the Department of Agriculture, we can make wheat. I'm from Kansas. That's the breadbasket of the nation, right? We can make wheat and a lot of it, and so that's why they made it the base. It wasn't because it's all that healthy for us, it's because we could make a lot of it. But really there's nothing special about grains that would suggest why we should make it the biggest part of our diet. So, I think I'm going to table fiber for another time. It used to be universally accepted that fiber was healthy, but recently there's been some interesting research to suggest that that it's mainly been overblown. I'm going to table that for another time because I want to talk about going carnivore-ish and a big kind of hubbub that folks can have about going more animal-based versus plant-based is the lack of fiber. But it turns out that maybe that's not as big of a deal as we once thought. So I want to table the fiber discussion for a minute. So, like I said, grains really came about on the scale about 10,000 years ago. When you compare that to the evolution of the human species of 2.5 million years, when you compare that to 10,000 years, it's just a minuscule part of our evolution. I'm sure there are plenty of people that can handle grains just fine, but just because someone can handle something doesn't mean that it's optimal, right? And considering that even like when we talk about quote-unquote whole wheat, when you go and look at the glycemic index scale, that a whole wheat bread will spike your blood glucose even faster than just consuming regular table sugar. Now, there's a reason for that. Table sugar is sucrose, which is glucose plus fructose. Fructose is metabolized in the liver, and so it doesn't have as much of a blood glucose spiking effect. But the fact that eating whole wheat bread will spike your blood sugar faster and higher than table sugar, that gives something to that gives you a peek into, really, should we be consuming a lot of this stuff? And that's my biggest thing, is just because somebody can handle it, there's a good percentage of the population that absolutely cannot. You have your true gluten allergies, right? But then you also have folks that I will defend at least have a sensitivity to it. But then for nobody really is it an optimal source, compared to you can get a lot more nutrients. You can get more fiber, if fiber is a good thing in the context of your situation, with a lot less anti-nutrients in other forms of food. So really, for nobody are grains really an optimal form of nutrition, especially not enough to consist of the base of a nutrition. If you want to go look at an ancient peoples who would be a modern nutritionist, wet dream, excuse my language, but would be the ancient Egyptians. Ancient Egyptians had a diet, just that was very, very bread based, and yet they had heart disease. Dentally, they were jacked up. They had tons of cavities, malformation of the jaws, and all that stuff. And so that's what I'm saying is the whole grains. It doesn't matter grains, whole grains. It doesn't really matter white or wheat pasta. They really should not be composing the basis of our diet. If you can handle bread once in a while, you can handle pasta once in a while, more power to you. Like I said, if I do that, if I have a carb-heavy meal or a grain-heavy meal, I can barely breathe the next day. So it's not even on my radar to even attempt anymore. But if you can handle it, cool. But it should not really make the basis of, I would say, anybody's diet day in, day out. So this is, I hope you enjoyed this episode. I'm wrapping up here about 41 minutes. I know I was rambling there a bit because I just get so excited about grains because everybody hears heart healthy whole grains, and really they should not be the basis of anybody's diet, especially when we have so much better sources to choose from. So I hope you found this informative. Again, if you enjoyed today's show, share it, leave a review. If you're interested in coaching, send me an email at ketodontist@gmail.com. I look forward to hearing from you guys. Join the Facebook group, and where we have more of these running conversations. I crack some rather blue jokes and articles and all that stuff, but you get a little bit more personal interaction with me. Again, I hope you guys enjoyed the show. Remember to go out there, eat well, move well, smile. I'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.